Welcome. This is Election of the President of Ukraine, a look from Washington, a special project by the Voice of America Ukrainian Service, and I am Tatiana Voroshko. No joke, a comedian is leading in Ukrainian election. Articles under this kind of headlines were all over US and world media on April 1st. A victory of a comedian, Volodymyr Zelenskiy, in the first round of Ukrainian presidential elections shocked the West and forced it to take a closer look at what is going on in Ukraine. However, there are people in Washington who never take their eyes off Ukraine, closely following its political developments and Russian interventionist policy. We will talk to them today about the reasons for Zelenskyy's strong lead, what can be expected from the runoff, and the reaction to these developments from Moscow and the West. Greetings to Brian Whitmore, a senior fellow and director of the Russia program at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Before joining CEPA, Whitmore was senior Russia analyst at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, as well as worked as a foreign correspondent for the Boston Globe in Moscow and Prague. Melinda Haring, the editor of the UkraineAlert blog, the most popular publication of the Atlantic Council, and a team member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and Michael Carpenter, is senior director of the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement. Dr. Carpenter previously served in the Pentagon as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense with responsibility for Russia, Ukraine, Eurasia, and the Balkans. Greetings. Thank you for coming. So, Michael, is Biden running in the elections?
Well, I don't want to make news of that sort here on your show.
We'll leave this conversation for another day and focus on the elections in Ukraine. So I remember during our last show, Melinda kind of predicted the results. So what do you think about the strong showing of Volodymyr Zelenskiy?
Look, this race is Zelenskyy's to lose. The second round is still competitive. If you look at the math that sociologists have done, it looks like Zelenskiy will get 2/3 and Poroshenko will get 1/3. That's how it looks. But a lot of things could change between now and April 21. The big issue that's on people's mind is the debate. Zelenskyy promised that he would debate, but he's backed up and said, no, I don't think I'm going to debate. I've got other stuff to do. Now, let's see how much the voters really want him to debate. Zelenskiy has not given press interviews. He's only talked to a few people. He hasn't issued any policy briefings. We really don't know what he would do as president. Voters deserve a right to know what their president wants to do in office.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree with Melinda on that. I mean, we really have not seen Zelenskiy in an unscripted moment even, never mind a whole unscripted debate. He's been selling the Ukrainian voters what I like to call puppies and rainbows and unicorns for this entire election. I want to see how he handles himself in a moment where he's completely unscripted and has to show what he knows and put forth his program, defend it in the heat of a debate. We haven't seen that, and his refusal to do that, I think, should weigh on Ukrainian voters' minds. Whether or not it will remains to be seen, but I think it should.
But do you think he needs it? I mean, does he need it?
Well, I mean, the rule of politics is when you're ahead, you are less interested in debating than when you're behind. But that said, this is not somebody that we've seen before in Ukrainian politics. It's not somebody I don't know anybody who has any idea what he's actually going to be like as president. You have people who are saying he might turn out to be a reformer. You have people who are saying he's just a tool of Kolomoisky. You have people saying he's a tool of the Russians. We don't know because we don't know anything. And a lot of it's because this campaign's been so scripted. And I'd like to see him in an unscripted moment.
But is it for sure that Poroshenko would benefit from debates? I mean, there was the same things that people were saying about Clinton and Trump.
I don't think it's clear at all. We'll have to see. And there could be some surprises. If there is a debate, if there's not a debate, there could be surprises of other types. But I think fundamentally, Zelenskiy has the advantage going into this second round. There's no doubt about that, because this is an indictment of the current system in Ukraine, at least in terms of the negative ratings that both Poroshenko and Tymoshenko had going into the first round. And so I think Ukrainian citizens are fed up with the status quo. They don't like corruption. They don't like the continuing intrigues and the drama surrounding corruption scandals in the country. And so they are voting for someone that is new, that is untested, if you will. And there's a lot of questions about how that candidate will turn out if, in fact, Zelenskiy wins the second round. But setting that aside, This is a vote on the status quo on the current system. And if that is, in fact, what holds true, then it's very likely that Volodymyr Zelenskiy will be the next president of Ukraine.
That's one of the main reasons for his strong showing in the first round. But we saw very strong critical media campaign in Ukraine aimed at Petro Poroshenko. Do you see there any bad players? Was it all freedom of speech, or was there?
Well, the media landscape in Ukraine, as we all know, is heavily dominated by the oligarchs. So I wouldn't. Yes, it was freedom of speech, but it wasn't just freedom of speech. It was there were oligarchic games being played out. There are a lot of analysts who believe that the whole Zelensky project is just a manifestation of the long-standing feud between Kolomoisky and Poroshenko. Now, we don't know if that's true. I'd be interested in hearing what my co-panelists think of that. But I think that we have had a media campaign against Poroshenko, and it's been effective.
I think that's precisely why we need a debate, though.
Right.
The big issues are, we don't know who Zelensky is. Was this his idea to run, or was it Kolomoisky's idea? What does he actually stand for? What does he care about? We have no idea. These are very basic questions that any journalist should be able to answer. And no one I know in Ukraine has the answers to these questions. What is your relationship with Kolomoisky? Will Kolomoisky be an official advisor? Will Kolomoisky's people be advisors? Will Kolomoisky's people be on your parliamentary list in the parliamentary elections in the fall? And I have a lot of questions about how I have a lot of questions about how Zelensky will behave as commander-in-chief. To date, he has not appointed any national security or foreign policy advisors. That's deeply troubling. To state the obvious, Ukraine has a situation that needs someone with a lot of experience. And the fact that we don't know who will be advising him and he doesn't have any foreign policy experience really scares a lot of people.
So look, Tatiana, I agree with my colleagues. I think debates are necessary, but I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that the debates are going to illuminate more than they could possibly obscure. I mean, these are stage-managed affairs, and we've got one candidate who is very experienced at performing on stage, another who has been in public life for over a decade and who also has that experience. I'm not sure we're really going to get the answers to the questions that the voters deserve and that you're asking here on the set. But, you know, we may see something very different in the debates. And it may not elucidate for the voters the actual policy issues that they want to hear. And furthermore, even if they do hear answers to the questions that you're posing and that others are posing, I don't know that necessarily those answers will comport with the reality once either candidate gets into office.
There are a few points that we know about Volodymyr Zelensky because we can just read it in his program. One of them is referendum on NATO. Or like organizations, which I'm not sure what of those are like organizations are. So what do you think about this idea? It's written down in the program.
I thought this was an issue that Ukrainians had already decided. I thought it's pretty clear that Ukraine is on a Euro-Atlantic path, that the society seems to have made its choice. And quite frankly, if there were a referendum, I think the results, I think we know what the results probably would be. So I'd say, what's the point?
Do we? I mean, things can...
Yes, we absolutely do know the results. The public opinion polling shows that a majority of Ukrainians support NATO membership and EU membership. Ukraine has the boat has sailed, as we say. Ukrainians have decided. They've been prosecuting a war for the last 5 years. They've lost 13,000 people. 1.7 million's lives have been completely upended. This issue is closed. The fact that Zelensky put this in his program is an appeal to voters in the South and the East to vote for him. Honestly, if he's elected, he's not going to be able to do this. So public opinion is going to constrain the foreign policy choices of the next president. Zelensky can say, he can talk about a referendum all he wants. He's not going to be able to do it. Ukrainians will not allow it.
No, I have a slightly different view. I see no problem with holding a referendum on NATO. I think there is a question mark about why this particular candidate, Zelensky, is relitigating this issue at this particular time. I think Melinda hit the nail on the head with saying that he's appealing to voters in the South and East. Now, that may not be such a bad thing to try to curry favor with a segment of the population that has not been fully represented in national policy debates. That may be okay. On its face, I don't see anything wrong with having a referendum on a crucial geopolitical issue like NATO membership. And I think NATO membership, if it is to come, is so far away that, in fact, it doesn't matter too much what happens in the next couple of years. So I think it's a kind of a safe place for him to be in, and I don't know that it's dispositive of his attitude on the matter, though it could be.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I'm wondering why. I mean, why he's posing this issue now? As Mike said, why litigate this at this point when we basically think that this issue is decided? And I'm not so sure this is such a great political play, perhaps to the east, but not so much to the south. I mean, if you go to places like Odessa and Mariupol, I would suspect that you would find some stronger pro-NATO attitudes in those places than the stereotypes would suggest. So I don't think I'm not sure this is such a smart political play to the south and to a lesser extent to the east. But I'm wondering why is this on his agenda? Why is he raising this where it's something that's been a given? It makes me wonder what his underlying agenda is.
Well, maybe one of the answers to this question is that he pushes for referenda on everything. He is suggesting that the very first piece of legislation they're going to introduce is the law on democracy, so that people can formulate tasks for the government, and the government's going to implement that. Naive or dangerous?
Dangerous. Look, I'm all for democracy, but
I wanted to say noble or dangerous.
having referenda in societies that are not historically have no experience in referenda is dangerous. I don't think we need to talk about what just happened in the UK, but I can bring the example of right here in America, in Mike's home state of California, where you had referendums which forbid raising taxes and forbid cutting spending. Well, what happens when you don't raise taxes and you don't cut spending? You have deficits, right? And this led to fiscal problems, which were later corrected by later referenda. But having referenda in places that do not historically have referenda is dangerous.
And it opens the door to foreign manipulation,
of course,
which is where the danger really comes in this case, because given the amount of Russian disinformation and the potential for even more, this opens up a can of worms that, frankly, I don't think is necessary.
See, and I think that gets to the heart of my concerns about Zelensky, whatever his intentions are. The Russians are interested in spreading chaos. The Russians are interested in chaos in Ukraine. And a Zelensky presidency, I think, increases the chances, whether that is his intention or not, it increases the chances for chaos in Ukraine. And I don't think we need chaos in Ukraine. We need for Ukrainian democracy to be consolidated. We need for Ukraine to make this jump from oligarchic pluralism to real pluralism. And so as imperfect as President Poroshenko is, he is the devil we know in this situation.
But Brian, you said that you think that the political elites are 10 years behind civil society.
At least.
And isn't Zelensky, isn't the strong showing that Zelensky had on Sunday more evidence at that point?
More evidence at that point because you see him as an expression of civil society?
Yes, that he's more in tune with people want a real fight. They want people in jail. They want their bottom line to improve, and Zelensky seems to speak to those issues.
Except for when you talk to people who truly want and are fighting for those things, they are not. I don't think they see him as the vehicle for that.
Then why is someone like Sergei Leshchenko behind Zelensky? Why is Alexander Daniluk behind him? Why is Ivars Abramovich behind Zelensky? These are all serious people.
Abramovich's is a more interesting question because you're seeing true reformers like Abramovich just bringing themselves closer to Zelensky, which is to me is the one mitigating factor here. But yes, I would say the political elite in Ukraine is at least 10 years behind the civil society, but I would include Zelensky in that political elite. I don't see
Hold
him
on,
as
but he's politically inexperienced. You can't put him in the political elite.
If he's
only been a comedian. That's unfair.
I consider him a tool of Kolomoisky, and therefore I consider him part of the elite.
Okay.
Well, what's interesting is if you look at the media coverage that went into the campaign, you had TV channels that were supported by Rinat Akhmetov, by Dmytro Firtash, by oligarchic interests, Medvedchuk as well, supporting Poroshenko, and then you had Kolomoisky stations supporting Zelensky. So to say that one side of the equation is oligarchic and the other is not.
No, both sides are oligarchic.
I think you see oligarchs using the race between these two candidates to try to achieve their own gains and advance their interests. I think it's the same with the reformist advisors who are trying to latch on to both campaigns. There have been reformists who have been circling around Poroshenko throughout his tenure as president, trying to get him to move forward with bold and ambitious reforms, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. Now they're starting to bandwagon around Zelensky, seeing if they can influence his opinion. But I just want to say one thing. I think one of the scenarios that we haven't really fully fleshed out is the possibility that Zelensky could be like a Bidzina Ivanishvili in Georgia, someone who takes a slightly less confrontational stance vis-a-vis Russia, who seeks to consolidate power around their brand and their loyalists to him personally, but doesn't necessarily veer drastically off the current foreign policy course. That is a possibility that you can't discount.
That's a possibility, and I know plenty of people in Tbilisi who would say beware of that possibility.
Right.
So I think that
I'm not putting it forward as a good option. I'm saying that's something that could, in fact, play out as a result of a Zelensky presidency.
And I think Moscow is completely comfortable with Bidzina Ivanishvili being the true power in Georgia, and I think they would be quite comfortable with Zelensky in Kyiv. But I want to, kind of step back and kind of inject maybe a little bit of optimism.
I'll inject a little pessimism. You go first.
I'm going to go for the optimism because basically I think we can't really get lost in the moment here. Ukraine's trajectory from the moment of independence has been very clear. Yeah, it's been 2 steps forward, maybe 1.78 steps back, and 2 more steps forward, and then another 1.7 back. But the trajectory's been pretty clear. I mean, the way I like to say it, and people probably have heard me say this before, is Ukraine has had what I consider 3 revolutions since independence. In '94, they had a free and fair election in which the incumbent president lost and did something remarkable for the former Soviet Union. He stepped down and let the guy that won take office. That had not happened anywhere in the former Soviet Union until it happened in Ukraine. It hadn't even happened in the Baltic states yet. So I consider that a revolution that set the stage. Elections matter in Ukraine. Elections are free and fair. And that has held true up until now. And if an election's not free and fair, like in 2004, there's hell to pay, right? That's important. 2004, what the world calls the Orange Revolution, I call the revolution of oligarchic pluralism. Because you basically had one oligarchic clan trying to take control of politics, the Donbas clan. And you had the other oligarchs, interestingly enough, led by Petro Poroshenko, saying, no, 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 we have oligarchic pluralism. And that won the day, and it embedded that. What happened in 2014, in my opinion, was the civil society saying, we want real pluralism now. We've had enough of this oligarchic pluralism. We want real pluralism, but that's the hardest step for any society in transition to take, making that step. And we're in the middle of the turbulence of that period for Ukraine. And what we're witnessing now looks kind of ugly and nasty when we're looking at it really close. But when you step back, the trajectory is clear. I welcome your pessimism.
Yeah. Go ahead,
fire
Melinda.
away.
I've got some pessimistic thoughts as well.
I think I'm closer to Mike on this one. At the end of the day, we're going to end up with either an oligarch, Petro Poroshenko, or a Zelensky who has links to an oligarch behind him. I mean, neither of these are ideal situations. And the fact that no one from the Euromaidan, someone who's new and clean and authentic, broke through over the last 5 years is really depressing. I mean, we're looking at the same old people. The system needs to be changed. More people need to be able to get through and compete at the highest levels.
So what you're both assuming, though, is that Zelensky is already, that his mind is cast, that he knows what he's going to do, right? Whereas I see him potentially as a little bit more of a blank slate. I think there's room for influencing and from civil society in order to pressure him to move in a pro-Western direction, and from the Kremlin to try to co-opt him and try and make him their project, as they have tried to do with Nikol Pashinyan in Armenia. Not successfully, as of yet. But I think you will see both pressures colliding from the pro-reform movement, the pro-Maidan strata of society in Ukraine, and then from the Kremlin. And where does he choose to go? He may know already, or he may think he knows, but perhaps it's still an open question. So
just basically the last question. Is there anything Poroshenko can do still win? Or is it all set? If you can just say it very shortly, very quickly.
I think the game is stacked against him right now. I think it's a tall order for him to win. I think this is Zelensky's to lose, but he could lose it.
Poroshenko can absolutely win. There's rumors in Kiev that there's all kinds of dirt on Zelensky that's soon to come out. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm about to head to Kiev, so I'll let you know if I hear anything. But a lot could change between now and the 21st.
Michael?
So Poroshenko has an uphill battle. Here's how he can win. He can say he will undertake a series of 10 or 15 reforms that he pledges to do within his first 3 months of office, and he has to be able to follow through. If he's credible with that, he has a small chance. If he doesn't put forward reforms, if he sticks with the same old slogans, I don't think he has a chance.
Thank you. This was Election of the President of Ukraine 2019, a look from Washington, a special project of the Voice of America Ukrainian Service. I'm Tatiana Voroshko. Our panelists are Brian Whitmore, a Senior Fellow and Director of the Russia Program at the Center for European Policy Analysis, Melinda Haring, the editor of the UkraineAlert blog, and Michael Carpenter, is Senior Director of the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement. Thank you for your attention and goodbye.